What are the best settings in Valorant? How can I gain competitive advantage over other players? Which keybinds will allow me to have better movement? How to boost my FPS and make enemies more visible? How can I improve directional sound and footsteps of my enemies? Should I use HRTF audio settings? Is toggle better than hold in Valorant?
Well, it's time to give you the answers on all of these and many other important questions. What's up, tricksters? My name is Charlotte, and your favorite all-time Radiant player, private FPS coach that improved thousands of people in Valorant, and man with many other talents and titles which you can find on my website or Discord server. Today I'm teaching you everything about the best settings in Valorant for a competitive advantage that will allow you to perform better and improve your skill ceiling as an FPS player. If you are truly serious about your improvement in Valorant, I highly recommend you to watch this Valorant guide from the beginning to the end, because every single second of this video is important for you and carries enormous amount of information, knowledge and experience that you won't find on any other BS YouTube channels that are just farming views. If you want to be the best, you gotta learn from the best. But if you're only interested in a specific topic, you have timestamps in the description of this video to make your life a bit easier. Now that all of the idiots that don't wanna work harder than last time are gone and they are watching the timestamps, congratulations to all of the tricksters that stayed, because improvement is not possible if you're choosing an easy path. Before this video starts, I'd really appreciate if you hit that subscribe button, turn your notifications on so you don't miss any new videos in future, leave a like and comment, follow me on twitch.tv/charlatan for some epic live streams, and make sure to check out my official website or Discord server for private Valorant and esports coaching. Other social media links are down in the description below, and it's time for you to learn everything about the best settings in Valorant. Let's go, baby! When it comes to the Valorant settings, it is important to take a quick note here. You want to make sure that you always have some kind of a competitive and gameplay advantage. No unnecessary movement. You need to split the tasks between your left hand and between your right hand. You don't want to be, I don't know, pressing with your thumb like the L button, the P button, like screwing up your hand in some unnatural positions. That is not our task. Your gameplay, movement, and settings should work with each other. They should complement each other and be like a water. And boy oh boy, this Radiant icon here looks juicy, man, like in any other episode. And if anyone was wondering, this is my collection of skins. Just a quick flex. Let's move into the settings. First important thing for us is the enemy highlight color. This is a bit more of a personal preference. Like for some players, like the red is gonna work a bit better. For some players, it's gonna be purple. I feel that yellow works the best as a outline color for the enemies. It is a bit easier for eyes to notice this color in different situations when it comes to enormous amount of abilities being popped out and just enemies hiding in shadows and corners. So I highly recommend you, if you have no preference here, to use yellow, and whether you use Deuteranopia or Protanopia, it really doesn't matter. It depends on what you see better, or if you have any like color blindness or something like that, then of course like use some other color. Now when it comes to the mouse settings in Valorant, we are gonna discuss sensitivity, how to find the perfect sensitivity, which softwares for sensitivity you should use, what should you do with these settings, like what should be your starting point, what should be your lowest or highest sensitivity in Valorant, in some of my future guides and tutorials. When you're adjusting your map in Valorant, one of the most important things is you always wanna see every single sector of the map, no matter where you're standing at that moment of time. Make sure that it is not too big, like in your face, and you don't see anything. Like this minimap here is very bad for an example. Like this, you don't see anything basically. Yes, you see the map a bit better, but trust me, even if you have the map like this, like you're gonna see the map. Like over time, your eyes are gonna get adjusted. Like you're not blind, like you are able to see what's happening. Yes, having a bit bigger map will help you with your map awareness, put a bit more focus on what's happening on the minimap, and I generally recommend that like 0.6 and 1 is usually the best. If you want the minimap to be a bit bigger, yes, you can make it a bit bigger and maybe like do 1.1 at 0.7, let's say, and this is also totally fine. But don't make your minimap too big like this. When I see this in my coaching sessions, I get a small heart attack. And when it comes to rotation and key player center options, like it is completely personal preference. If you don't keep the player centered like I do, you can actually make your minimap even bigger than my map is. So you can make something like this. But I keep player centered, so I need to use something like this. So that is one workaround that you can do. If you want your map to be bigger than mine here, you can just keep players off center. You can go all the way, crank it up here, and voila! You have a big, beautiful map where you see everything at every single corner. These options are completely personal preference and they don't matter at this moment of time. When it comes to the first person handedness, I use the right model because I'm the right eye dominate player. If you're a left eye dominant player, then I recommend you to use the left model. How you can decide whether you're a left or right eye dominant, I will be discussing in some of my future videos where I will be coaching you on some other stuff. Now, this option here, always show inventory, is very important to be turned on because sometimes, especially if you're a lower elo player, you will pick up the spike or some kind of a weapon from the ground without you realizing that you do that. And then this option will always turn on your inventory here, and you will know exactly at every single time what are the different options that you have, what are different guns that you picked, or maybe if you have the spike, drop it to your teammates. Show mature content, always turn it on, turn on the corpses and turn on the blood. It makes your gameplay a bit better, a bit more realistic, and also blood kinda gives you some kind of a competitive advantage because blood is much better than the stupid sparkles from, I don't know, like some fairy tale like Peter Pan coming out of the enemy's head. You are not a Peter Pan. You are not a Tinker Belly. You are a highly trained FPS machine, and you wanna see that blood flowing from the enemies. The reason why you should be turning on the blood is because if you headshot the enemies around the corners, like, I don't know, the enemies here, and you inflict like some headshot to the wall, that blood is much more visible than the sparkles. And then you can give your allies the information whether some enemy is low, and also you will have the information like if you dealt any damage to that enemy, so maybe you can force a gunfight to go into the face of the enemy, etc, etc. The other options are completely like personal preference, and majority of them are just observer options. And when it comes to the show bullet tracers, turn this on. We always want to see the bullet tracers, and we always want to see the bullet tracers of our weapon as well, so we can control our spray patterns easily in Valorant. Now, when it comes to the controls, one important statement that we need to make is you need to split the work that your left hand and right hand is doing. On your left hand, your three middle fingers, like the middle finger, index finger, and the pointy finger, should mainly be used for your WASD movement. It is really important to remove any unnecessary tasks on these three fingers. When it comes to your left hand, it is really important that your pointy finger is only being used like to fire your weapon, and your middle finger should mainly be used for the secondary aim, like for ADS, for sniper rifle aim, and maybe for scrolling up and down, like if you're using something on the scroll wheel. And that is the whole point of these 5 fingers on 2 of your hands. All the other fingers should be used mainly for some other tasks or to provide a stability to your aim of your mouse. One more tip that is really important as well is that you need to split your keyboard in 2 parts. When you're adjusting the settings in any video game that you're playing, you want to make sure that your keybinds are accessible with your left hand while they are positioned on WASD keys. So basically, you never want to push your keybinds beyond this line here. So beyond 7, Y, G, B, and space. That is the borderline between the keybinds that you should and shouldn't be using for the main tasks in the video game that you're playing. One more important tip. when you're adjusting the ability settings in Valorant, I have the default profile. I don't have any like agent profiles because I want my gameplay to be consistent. I always want to know that when I'm using the secondary ability, it is on my mouse. When I'm using the ability 1, it is on Q. When it comes to the abilities in Valorant, I highly recommend you to split your abilities in 2 categories. Abilities on your keyboard and abilities on your mouse. On your mouse, you should be using the abilities that are movement-based abilities for agents like Jett, Raze, I don't know, like Reyna, Dismiss, etc, etc. So Dash, Satchel, Reyna, Dismiss, abilities like that, like Teleport of the Chamber, should always be on your mouse. So we don't put any movement strain or interaction with our left hand. What do I mean by that? So let's say for an example you're playing Jett and you want to use the dash ability to the right side like this. If your dash ability is on your E keybind, you will have to screw up your fingers way too much, like your pointy finger, way too much to actually press your E key, and there is a lot of room for the mistakes in that process. Maybe you will not press the D key in the time and you will just dash in forward towards the enemies. Maybe you're gonna press some other additional button, and we don't want that to happen for you. That is why I have the secondary ability as well on my mouse button. So ability 2 and ability 3 are on my mouse button, so I can use the updraft without any obstruction of my left hand. I can use my dash ability with a lot of freedom, dashing diagonally, left, right, backwards. I can do whatever I want because my main 3 fingers on my left hand are mainly being used for W, ASD keys, and my movement with agents is not obstructed in any type of way. I have chosen for the ability 1 Q button because mainly ability 1 is just the equip abilities or instant drop abilities, like for an example the smoke of the Jett. So it really doesn't matter where you put ability 1, just make sure it is close enough so you can press it immediately in the middle of a gunfight. And my ultimate is on left alt. Maybe this is not the best option if you're using alt tab often to go inside and outside of the game, like you're doing something on your PC. But anyways, while you're playing a competitive ranked match, you should be focused on the actual match, not on P-Hub. My basic movement settings like forward, backward, strafe, right are WSAD, just the default settings. And when it comes to the default movement mode, no matter which game you're playing, Valorant, CSGO, Warzone, Apex, always make sure that this option is on run if there is a run in that specific game as an option. You don't wanna be a Grandpa Joseph. Joseph Grandpa is a very bad grandpa because his ability to peek enemies with a fast shoulder peek, his ability to engage the enemies is very, very slow. Don't be like a Joseph Grandpa. My walk is on left shift. Why not? I usually recommend players to use their pinky finger for crouching down, for walking, because your pinky finger should mainly be used for this left part of your keyboard. Toggle walk and toggle crouch should never be used. And that is where we enter
toggle versus hold debate in Valorant. What is better?
Hold will allow you to have less unnecessary clicks and less unnecessary movement when it comes to your keyboard and mouse, and it will also allow you to engage enemies more precisely, faster, and enemies that are engaging you from different corners, different angles, or when the enemies are engaging you in the multiple squads in the same time. Also, when you have the toggle mode instead of the hold mode for walking, crouch, aim down sight, etc., maybe because, I don't know, adrenaline is flowing, like you're in a high combat situation, you're fighting multiple enemies, you will misclick this button instead of releasing it like a normal human being, and maybe something like this is gonna happen. So you toggle the walk, like you pick the enemies like this, and you toggle the walk in a wrong time, and you are dead. Or maybe if we have the toggle on crouch, like we are using the toggle crouch, we use the crouch peek mechanic like this, and now you're the crab and you forgot to crouch. Or you wanna engage the enemy, you wanna uncrouch, and then you press the crouch again. Basically, when you have the toggle as an option for all of these things, what you're essentially doing, you're adding unnecessary variables in your gameplay that can F you up. When it comes to the jump, I use the jump on mouse wheel down because it is much easier to use the bunny hop mechanic when you're using the mouse wheel, and it is the habit that I have from CSGO basically. And when it comes to why I use the jump on X as well, when you're using jet, like, you cannot really glide if you're using the mouse wheel button as your jump button. So basically, I use the X to glide and I use the mouse wheel to jump. Now these options really don't matter, they are whatever, and we can move into the equipment settings. In equipment settings for fire, I'm using the left mouse button, alternate fire is the right mouse button, aim down sight and sniper rifle aim are on hold, for the same reasons that I just explained for walk and crouch. Let's say for an example, you're holding this angle here with operator, and enemies are engaging from there and there in the same moment of time. This will allow you to have higher reaction time and to save valuable milliseconds instead of having the toggle button. So let's say for example you're double scoped here and you're fighting the enemies there. You can instantly unzoom and basically fight the enemies here, instead of staying scoped and doing this, which is much harder than if you were unscoped. Like, it is insanely hard when you're double scoped to basically change between different angles from which enemies might be engaging at that moment of time. And that is why this option to hold my scope and switch between 1x and 5x is much smoother, and I can fight the enemies at different angles and different positions much easier. I save the valuable time for myself, and this time will be significant for you, especially when you reach higher ranks like Immortal 3 and Radiant, where TENS is gonna be ripping your head apart in less than 200 milliseconds, and you need to save every single millisecond that is valuable for that specific gunfight. Equipment options, these are the ones. I use the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, for scrolling through the weapons and the spike. Like, I feel that you should never use any type of mouse wheel, any type of like other variables to go through your weapons and through the spike. Like, get adjusted to using 1, 2, 3, and the 4 or 5, like for scrolling through your weapons. That is much more precise, much more consistent than if you're using a mouse wheel. Also, if you're using the mouse wheel to scroll through the weapons, sometimes accidental mouse wheel clicks are gonna happen, and then when you're fighting the enemy, you will accidentally go to the secondary weapon, and voila, you are dead. That is why I'm not using a mouse wheel for anything else except like the jump button, and I'm using the mouse wheel down purposely because it is much harder when you're aiming and fighting the enemies to accidentally hit your mouse wheel down instead of your mouse wheel up. Mouse wheel up is much easier to be pressed and much easier to be scrolled to, and that is why I use the mouse wheel down for jumping. So I completely removed this option, equip last use item, I never use it. Like this option is also unnecessary variable in your gameplay. Prioritize strongest weapon off. All of these things should be off and non-existent in your gameplay. I use the V to drop equipped item. This is some habit that I have from my PUBG Pro days and CSGO Pro days. Like, I don't know, I just got used to using the V to drop my utility. When it comes to interactions, I keep the inspect weapon on T. Now, there is one gameplay competitive advantage reason why I use it so close to my pointy finger, and I'm gonna explain the competitive advantage of using the inspect weapon in some of my future videos when it comes to holding the angles, when it comes to engaging the enemies, so we're gonna cover that a bit later. When it comes to the use object, I use the E one more time. This is like from my PUBG days, professional days, and I don't know, I just get used to using the object on E. Use the spike, make sure that it is not on the same button as equip the spike. It is really bad if those two options are interacting, because then, for an example, if you're on the site and your Sage is asking you to drop the spike so she can plant the spike, you will not be able to drop the spike because your model, your character, will immediately be planting the spike. He doesn't understand what you're saying to him. You cannot equip the spike in your hands. So you will have to go outside of this zone and then drop the spike to your Sage. Instead of that, make sure that those two options are separated. And use spray for me is why? Why is the why? Because why not? Once you like kill one enemy, kill the second enemy, kill the third enemy, fourth, fifth enemy, ace, pentakill, bam! BM on your enemies, use the spray and make sure that you go and teabag that motherfucker. Now when it comes to your main voice push-to-talk key, I highly recommend you that this option is somewhere where it is easy to be pressed with your thumb button. Any type of push, press to hold keys should never be on your mouse. That is one more important thing when it comes to your settings in FPS games. Never put any type of press to hold action on your mouse, except the ADS and sniper rifle aim. Why? Because then you're putting way too much hold options on your mouse and that can screw up your aim. Now when it comes to these options, I turn everything off, not needed. I don't use like radio commands, I don't use the radio commands wheel, completely pointless. Like if you're already using your voice, if you're already talking, I mean, you don't need these options. What is useful, and those are the pings. Pings are very important in Valorant. Like smart pings actually allow you to have easier time placing your utility, having better crosshair placement, etc. I keep it on Z because I got used to that option. Maybe there is a better like setting that you can make for this option to not screw up your fingers as much as I'm doing. Like maybe keeping it on like V or C or something like that and readjusting your drop key to G. But make sure that like smart pings are very easy for you to press, so you can have much easier time like placing your utility around the angles or engaging the enemies or giving the tactical callouts to your allies. Now when it comes to interface, all of these options are basically default for me. The only thing that I have changed is show teammates loadout is on N instead of left alt, because I'm using left alt for my ultimate ability. Now, when it comes to the crosshair settings in Valorant, what are the best crosshair settings? Crosshair aimbot, crosshair wallhack, crosshair this, crosshair that, inhuman crosshair, like those settings we're gonna cover in some of the future guides and tutorials, because we need to make a separated video for this topic. It is a very vast topic and this is my current crosshair. You can find the settings on my Discord server, on my Twitch channel, and also in a description of this video. And now we move to the most important settings in Valorant, and those are the video settings. To boost your FPS, to have better quality of gameplay, to gain some competitive advantage, etc, etc. First thing that we have is the display mode. Make sure that any video game that you're playing at a full screen. If you're playing your games in a windowed mode, other background applications are gonna impact the performance of your game, and you will be getting less FPS, more latency, and in some cases like basically some stuttering in your gameplay. Always use the full screen mode. The difference between full screen and window in some video games is actually insane. In Valorant, window full screen is kinda okay, it is not that bad, but still oftentimes like when the new patches come out, there's a lot of bugs, and I've seen some bugs where the window full screen mode can literally destroy your FPS in Valorant. Full screen is the way to go. When it comes to resolution, I play on native resolution. Every single like FPS game that I played on this resolution, and I use 240Hz monitor. And when it comes to the aspect ratio, it really depends what type of resolution you're using. I will make a separated guide like how to make a stretched resolution in Valorant, like the OG stretched resolution where the models are stretched as well, in future in my guides. I highly recommend you, if you have a high-end PC or a medium-level PC, to never use any limiters to your FPS. You want your PC to have the highest output on your gameplay and to have the highest available FPS at every single time of your gameplay. The only time when I would recommend any of these limiters is if you're using, let's say, a laptop, or you're using a PC that has the overheating problems, to put a bit less pain on your PC. Maybe like you can limit your FPS like to the refresh rate of your monitor or slightly a bit higher to reduce that overheating potential of your GPU or CPU of, let's say, your laptop or a PC that has some kind of a problems. NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency, turn this option on plus boost. Now, when it comes to the graphics quality, this is maybe the most important part of this video. And basically, in Valorant, we have two options when it comes to the graphics settings. We have the option where we are adjusting our settings to have the highest frame rate possible and also the most beautiful game possible. Or we can basically save every single frame per second and just focus on the performance of the game. So if you have a high-end PC and you want your game to look as beautiful as possible and also to have a decent amount of frame rate and not sacrifice too much frames per second, these are the settings that I recommend to you. On the other hand, if you want to focus on the gameplay performance, on your FPS, to take every single inch of that juicy FPS to fight the enemies, then I highly recommend you to use these settings. This is how your gameplay and your skins are gonna look like if you're using the first option, where we are focusing on the quality of the game, we're focusing like on details, on like making the game a bit more beautiful, a bit more colorful, and like a bit more realistic, so to say. And this is how your game would look like if you're just focusing on seeing the enemies as soon as possible. We are removing any additionally like unnecessary like material qualities and like skin qualities, and we just want to focus on ripping our enemy's head apart. Now I'm gonna explain you what each of these options do, how much FPS you're sacrificing, and then you can choose what you wanna use instead of my two recommendations. Multi-threaded rendering should always be on in any FPS game that you're playing. Basically, it allows your CPU and GPU to use all the cores and all of the threads, and basically to focus on the highest performance and give you the most amount of FPS. The difference when you're using this option on or off is significant. When you have this on off, you will get around, let's say, 40 to maybe even 60 FPS less than if you're using this option on. Material quality is a purely cosmetical option. Basically, this option renders like the skins, the texture, the objects, the enemies to a bit higher levels. I'm using this option on high because I have a bit better PC, and I'm sacrificing around 5 to 10% of my FPS when I'm using this option on high or medium. But if you have a bad PC, or like you just want to focus on gameplay and you want to focus on seeing the enemies as soon as possible, just use this option on low. Texture quality in Valorant is really pointless, like it does absolutely nothing. Also, when you have this option on high or medium or low, it really doesn't matter for your FPS and your CPU or GPU usage. Like it literally doesn't do anything. Like I see really no difference if I have this option on high or if I have this option on low. Like nothing changes in your gameplay, and it is absurd using this option at all. Just keep it in low. End of the story. Detail quality is really important option for us. It is a competitive advantage option. What do I mean by that? When detail quality is on high, it adds a lot of unnecessary elements to the gameplay. Shadows, some random like textures, some things that might obstruct your vision of seeing enemies as soon as possible and fighting them. Also, this option adds a lot of detail elements to smokes, abilities, damaging abilities, and they are obstructing your vision to see the enemies in real time. When you turn this option on low, all of these detail quality elements are a bit less visible and your gameplay is a bit cleaner. UI quality really doesn't matter. Like it changes literally nothing except like what I can notice, like it changes this transparent like background here, so the gameplay is a bit more visible. It doesn't have any impact on your FPS, so you can keep it at high, medium, low. It really doesn't make any difference. Vignette basically adds the shadow at the corners of your screen, here, 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 and here. This option is very pointless. It will consume a bit of the performance and FPS from your PC, and I highly recommend you to turn this option off. We use this option to put a bit less strain on our eyes when we have long game time periods, but it really does nothing for you, except it F's you up. Also, like as I said previously, I always am focused on making my game as bright as possible and as vibrant as possible, so that I'm able to see my enemies in real time and to notice them wherever the F my enemies are. VSync should be disabled for the same reasons why we disabled the G-Sync or the FreeSync on AMD GPUs. So now, what the heck is anti-aliasing? Anti-aliasing basically smoothens out the edges of objects, the enemies, the guns, the skins, everything in the game is a bit smoother. So basically there is no jagged pixels. Here, as you can see, when the anti-aliasing is none, you can see here, when I'm slowly moving my crosshair, like these lines here are a bit jagged. When we turn on this option on 2x, 4x or FXAA, you can see how they are a bit smoother. No matter how much I'm moving my crosshair, like this line stays smoothened out. Now, my personal recommendation is to always keep this option on none for two reasons. When you're using any of these anti-aliasing options, you sacrifice a lot of FPS. You sacrifice around 5% to 10% of your performance in Valorant. Second reason is, when this option is on none, and we see these jagged edges of enemies, of skins, of guns, of objects, sometimes when the enemy is holding an angle, you will be able to see that enemy faster because of these jagged pixels. Sometimes these pixels will flow in the positions where they should not be flowing, and then when you're slowly engaging the enemies around the corners, you will see the tip of the gun of the enemy because of these jagged pixels faster than you would see it if this option was on some of these settings. Anisotropic filtering is completely cosmetical option in Valorant. Basically, anisotropic filtering renders the texture, the skins, the guns, the the objects, the enemies to a bit higher levels. Now, whether you go with 4x, 8x, 16x, completely depends how good your PC is, because you will sacrifice some amount of FPS when you enable this option. Improved clarity is the settings in Valorant that allows you to see the enemies a bit better. It adds a bit more contrast to your gameplay and to the background and the highlight of the enemies. How much of a competitive advantage this gives you is very minimal. Like, I really don't feel this is that useful of an option. Like, I keep it on because I have like a bit better PC, but this sacrifices around 5 to 6% of your frames per second. So I highly recommend you to turn this option off at all times. Only if you have a really high-end PC like I do, and losing, 10 or 20 frames really doesn't matter for me, I'll keep this option on. Beta experimental sharpening, completely diminishing returns of this turning on. You sacrifice a lot of frames per second for basically nothing, like invisible sharpening. Turn this off, you save a lot of FPS. Bloom is a very important option for us. When the bloom is disabled, basically all the objects, abilities, skins, texture that is glowing is gonna have a bit less glow. It's gonna be a bit less beautiful, so to say. And when the Sova is doing the ultimate, his ultimate in front of you is gonna be a bit less bloomy, and then you will be able to see enemies a bit better. Or if the enemy raise is throwing a grenade at you, those particles effects of nade, of Brimstone ultimate, are gonna be a bit less glowy, and you will be able to notice enemies a bit better. But one problem, it's not a problem, but one thing that bothers me a lot is when this option is turned off, the skins in Valorant look like a absolute poo-poo caca. Like, let's be honest, this Radiant and this gun looks like absolute scheisse. But when I turn this option on, look at this. Ah, come on, man. So that is the main reason why I'm using the bloom instead of my gameplay, and this option really impacts the quality of the skins and different elements in the game. But if you want the competitive advantage, and if you don't want to sacrifice unnecessary frames per second to make your skins look more beautiful, then just turn off this option. Distortion and cast shadows are completely pointless two options in Valorant, diminishing returns for the amount of FPS that you sacrifice. Anyways, like the cast shadows in Valorant is completely like first-person related, so even if you turn this option on, you will not see the shadows of the enemies like you would see it in CSGO. Like, it has no gameplay or, I don't know, like any type of advantage value, so you're just sacrificing your FPS for nothing. And this is the reason why I recommend these settings and why am I using these settings as my current Valorant settings. If you want to save your frames and you just want to focus on competitive advantage and to have the absolutely maximum amount of FPS from this game, turn everything off, keep the multi-threaded rendering on, really important, and enjoy effing up your enemies.
Now we can move to the stats option. Listen here and listen closely. You are not a doctor. You don't, no surgeon, no beep beep. You are not a mechanic. You are not working in a SpaceX system for Elon Musk. Please, if you come in my coaching sessions with this amount of screen information that is obstructing your vision, that is obstructing your focus on the gameplay, you are a madman. You don't need, you seriously need to turn off all of this. Like, I turn into Arnold Schwarzenegger from this. Like, come on, man.
Turn off all of these settings. You don't need to see this info on your screen. It is just turning your focus away from the gameplay and from the real things that you should be focused on. Audio settings and generally audio is very, let's say, personal preference. Like, it really depends what type of headset you have. It depends like how do you perceive audio, which frequencies do you hear, which frequencies do I hear. General rule in FPS games is that having your gameplay have a bit more treble and a bit less bass is good for you. Because gunshots in any game that you're playing, like for example Valorant, they're a bit more bass related. Basically, if you boost the bass on your headset, you're gonna hear the gunshots a bit better, and basically the game is gonna feel a bit more realistic, like it's in your face. But if you turn up the treble on your headset, those higher frequencies, basically you're gonna hear the enemy's footsteps a bit better. I personally use my headset on default settings, and also I don't use any external softwares anymore. Main reason for that is because I bought the headset called Odyssey Penrose X. That is literally the best, absolutely best headset that I ever used in my life. It is also wireless, it has 15 nanometer drivers, and the game feels like I'm actually on a battlefield. But if you have a bit lower tier headset, yes, feel free to adjust those options in external softwares or in your gaming softwares of a specific headset. Now, when it comes to the audio in Valorant, sound effects, always crank them up all the way to high to hear every single like ability dropped and everything that might be important for your gameplay. Voiceover volume for me is up. Those are like the agent flavors, the tactical callouts, etc, etc. Video volume and all of these things are off. You really don't need this. And make sure that speaker configuration is always on stereo. When the speaker configuration is on mono, basically, no matter if the enemies are forward or backwards behind you, you will hear the enemies inside of yourself. You have no directional sound because the sound is not being rendered on your left and right earbud or I don't know, like earpad. HRTF provides better 3D spatialization of sounds, basically distincting where the enemies are, like left, right, I don't know, 90 degrees, 180 degrees. But I had a very bad experience with HRTF settings in any video game that I played. Personally, I am against this option no matter what type of headset you have. Maybe if you have some headset from AliExpress, maybe it's gonna be useful for you. You're gonna not notice that much of a quality loss when it comes to the sound of your gameplay. But if you have a high-end gaming headset like a G Pro X wireless, Black Shark V2 Razer wireless, the Odyssey Penrose X, any GSP like from Sennheiser, I highly recommend you and I advise you to never use this option. Now, voice chat options completely not important, like literally whatever. And when it comes to the voiceover, make sure that all of these options are on because these options will tell you a lot of different things when it comes to your gameplay. Like tactical callouts are very, very useful. Agent flavor is also very useful, like sometimes, and to boost maybe your morale as well. These settings are really important. Keep them on, and sometimes you will get like the information that you otherwise wouldn't get from your teammates. And VoIP Ducks flavor, voiceover, basically what this option do is when your teammate is talking in the same time, let's say for example as Cypher is telling some stupid joke, then your teammate is gonna be loud and clear, fully audible, and the Cypher is gonna be muffled a bit, lowered down a bit, so you're able to clear your ally. And with this option, we are closing the settings and you're ready to dominate your enemies in Valorant, baby! Ooh-wee, baby! This was a long journey, my dear tricksters, but you're definitely on the right path to improve if you watched everything to the end. Before this video ends, please consider subscribing while turning your notifications on, leave a like and comment so other players can also see this video, share it with your friends, check out my official website or Discord server if you want to get private coaching in Valorant, and other social media links are down in description below. I'm yours, one and only, Warden of the Tricksters community. Thank you for watching, and cut, baby!